Okay, so this is the lab we need to do. So we are going to use the Java exception handling framework. So let's try to identify the exception that might occur in the rider UI. So you can say this is the rider manager UI. When I click on the buttons empty without putting any values and just click add rider, you might be able to see your program has some exceptions. Look at it. So when I click each time this empty button, you will get a number format exception. So can you try to read it? This is the exception we need to avoid. Now, when I click on the program, we can directly run it. So that is bad. We don't want to have like this. So we want something when I click on the button, we should show error message like the values are empty or mismatch without giving an exception on the bottom like this. So we want to avoid this type of error. So let's try to identify it. So when I click on this add rider button, you can see the logic behind it, right? So can you show me how to write a try catch blocks to avoid that if the values are empty, like if the name and the country these are empty and try to convert it into age, what will happen? You need to put a try catch blocks. So can you show me a way to write a try catch to this statement? So you can put a try catch block here to here. So and try to write the logic. So what should happen here is when you run it, so currently the problem is when you put some values that is okay. So like if you put some values then it is fine. But if you put empty, that's a problem. Like if you put values, they add a rider. That is what we learned so far. But if you put something empty, like these things empty, so when you try to add, you don't get anything, but you get exception in the inverter. So the class is actually, so far what we discuss is like array index out of bound number format exception. Those are the exceptions that we can see. But here this time you can see a new type of Java class, and this is the stack trace, right? Look at this. Compared to the stack trace that we have seen in the lecture, it has so many methods they are calling, right? They call number format exception integer dot pass method because that's the method they call. So they call the list of methods that has this error. Now what you need to identify is, now we have found out the errors occurring in this region here to here. So you need to put a relevant try catch blocks. So how do you write it? So can you write a try catch blocks and put a screenshot into the chat? So I'll give some time, about 10 minutes. Just figure it out. Put a try blocks and add a relevant catch area for this button. So you need to double click on this add rider button and we'll write a try catch for that. So think, then I'll give some time to figure it out. No, not this NetBeans lab is not for the exam, like, but the try catch logics is there, right? Try catch part is there, but NetBeans is there for your group project. For your group project, these knowledge are needed, right? So how we create the module classes and the controllers. Just the database part lab, we'll do it in the after the final exam. We'll do the last two layers, service layer and the database layer. We need to complete the final output. So we'll see how to do that in the last. Yeah, it's mostly on the lectures only, right? Lectures and the tutorials. So how do you try catch for this section? Can I put it and show it to Jack? You can take a screenshot, right? You don't have to copy the code. Just take a screenshot. That's also fine. So complete it. I'll give some time until 3:20. Then we can discuss the answers. Okay, so how do you write this try catch? We know that definitely these are the, like, if the text are empty, you try to convert it into double and height and integer, you will get some exceptions. So that is why these are empty. So we don't want to do that. So what we can do is we can put a surrounding try and a catch area here to here. So what is the exception we need to catch is very simple, because we have seen that exception in the output window. You can see the output window. So this is java.lang.number format exception. So we can use that name, number format exception. So if the number format is not correct, like if you try to put integer but you get a double, or if you just put empty here, you get number format exception. So we can add a surrounding try catch block for this number format exception. So what did I do is just put a try, add a catch block in front of it. So if I zoom it out a little bit, you can see the font. Let me zoom it out like 18. You can see how it is easy to write a try catch. Just surround it with the entire block, try and a catch. Now this time we don't need system out.println because we have a J option panel just to show a message box. We can say an error. You can say rather than putting an error rider, you can say invalid user input. So your input is incorrect. You can show a message to the user. Now when I run this file, save it and run this rider UI, you will be able to see that when I click just add write button, they recognize now this is empty because it go to the exception that we go and show the invalid user input. So all of you try to get that. So this is how you identify one type of exception. So if you try to double click on the calculate BMI also, you can put a try catch. And if you try to click on the search also, you can put a try catch. So I want all of you to completely surround it with the try catch blocks with the relevant type of exceptions and complete the first question. So we have identified one type of exception. Just try twice, we'll complete it. So after that, we'll write a custom exception class. So try to complete the first one. So this is the answer for the first example number 1. So this lab is very simple, right? You just put try catch surrounding to identify the error types that we want to display. So likewise, not only this class, you can put try catch for the main UI, login UI, bicycle UI, savings account UI. Likewise, you can complete the entire class. So we started with a very simple program, the hello world program. Then we just added layers, and add new classes, and it's now a complete project. So there will be one more lab about database connection to the SQL server after the final exam. I put the date on the Moodle. So join that. We will connect this to the SQL server and publish your project as a executable. That means that we can run not on the NetBeans as a separate desktop application. We'll see how to do that. So before that, just complete this try catch blocks for all the buttons and see what are the errors that you can identify. So I'll give some times until 3:30. So then we can discuss the answers. So using this technique, you can try to put try catch for other scenarios like this. For example, the BMI one, if you just click on the calculate BMI without putting any values, also you get exception. See, this time it is null pointer exception. It says null. You can see the exception type under that. So you can just double click on it. So this is the button. So you can add a try catch. Try and a catch. So it is null pointer exception this time. So we can put the null pointer exception and put the try catch, and we can show a message like early case. We can say the data is empty because null pointer means uh, data is empty. So you have to put some data. So now when I run it, so when I click on the button, earlier it got an exception. Now when I click on it, you can see data is empty, kind of exception we are getting. So it's that simple. Just surround the blocks with try and catch, so you will be able to complete it very easily. So here also there's another button that we need code. So that is for the search rider. So when I click on it, it says rider not found. So that is also we can put a try catch and identify that kind of a exception. So we can put try catch. If we don't know the exception type, we can provide a catch block like super class, like the exception or runtime exception, and we can say something went wrong if we can't find something to the user. Something went wrong. So likewise, we can customize our exceptions the way we like to have. So like this way, just complete it. So we can just put a try catch, and try catch. So that is how you identify some exceptions in that rider UI. So that will be complete in the first question in that paper. So then there's one second question that we need to write. So it says write a custom class called invalid BMI details which validate the weight and height of a person if the values are less than or equal to 0. So usually you can't have a person with 0 weight if you want to calculate the add rider. So in that case, now usually we add the rider weight and height. It doesn't matter whether your height is less than or 0. We'll add it as the rider. But we don't want to do that. So in that case, what we can do is we can provide another customized exception using the throw keywords that we discussed in the lecture today. So let's see how to do that. So before that, try to complete the last two try catches. Complete this try catch, complete this try catch, complete the try catch. So then we can discuss how to complete the custom exception class that we want to validate. Now, if you want to write a custom class, if your weight and height is less than or equal to 0, we can write if condition here. Because this is where we can validate whether the height and weight is less than 0. So we can check whether if this height is less than or equal to 0, or you can put a O gate. If the weight is also less than or equal to 0, so that should be another type of error that we should generate. So custom exception. So these are just traditional number format if you don't put values, but this one is a customized exception because we can't have a weight less than 0. So in that case, we can write a custom exception for this class. So in order to do that, we want to write a thing called invalid BMI details. So where we should get the details of the BMI and whether it is less than 0, we should generate it in the catch. So what we can do is, since it is a customized exception class, we don't create it under model because that's a normal model class. So usually we can create under utilities to just will help to track errors. We can create a package under the utilities. Like we have only just created the main method, just test something. Here we can just write another Java class. So I'm going to create invalid BMI exception. So this is the custom class that we provided to generate if the values are less than or equal to 0, we need to provide an invalid BMI. So since it is actually a package, we don't need these comments. Now since I want to make sure it's the exception, we have to extend from a super class. So let's exception from the runtime one, like we discussed the exceptions. We can put whether it is error, whether it is an exception, whether it is SQL, whether it is a runtime error. So since it is a runtime error that use a type incorrect negative numbers as weight, we can put a runtime exception. So once you do that, so that class can be imported here and used to catch that exception. So first of all, let's generate this customized message like your index, like your BMI cannot be like the weight and height cannot be 0. So we can just generate a new code here. So which will be able to override the default, like the two get the message of the current one. So click on this get message and you can just click generate. So where did I create this class? It should be under the utilities, right? I create it under utilities invalid BMI exception. So I just use it my customized class. So we don't need this generated one. You can just return. You can say weight and height cannot be less than or equal to 0. So this is the custom message I want to print to the user. So weight and height cannot be less than or equal to 0 since it is a customized exception that we have written. So we can import it in the class. So we have to import it. So far we have imported from the module class, the module folder. Now this is utility folders, utilities dot invalid BMI exception. So this class we have to import it in order to use it because we are in a two different package. So now we can just put a catch to catch that exception. Create object like a normal way, and we can show the message. So instead of the invalid user input, we can just get ex dot get message. Now we should throw the exception that will be kept here. So I'm going to put the class throw by creating a new object of that exception class user. So now this is a customized exception class that we have created in this program. So you can see the difference now. This is invalid BMI exception, our own class. So which has an override method to get the customized error message. So now when you run it, you will see the output. You can run this ride UI. So now when you put the rider name and the country and age, wait, actually let's put 0 and this one -1, -50. Now you can't put these values in a real scenario, right? Height and weight cannot be negative or 0, so that's not a good example. So if I click on the button now, you get that customized error message that we throw can says that weight and height cannot be less than or equal to 0. This is an error message exception that we generated. Like we can just show a message directly, but this is actually more straightforward because we know that this is an error kind of exception that we might be occurred in the runtime. Otherwise, if we just print a message, there's no point, right? So now by looking at this method, we can categorize now, okay, this is an exception and this is another exception that we can try to focus. So try to complete this one. I'll give some time. So you need to create this class under the utility package init BMI exception and extend from the super class, which is runtime. Then you can import it under the invalid BMI exception. Then we can throw that exception and print the script. So that is the answer for the question number 2. So let's write the last one, error handling for this login button. That is, let's see how to validate a hard-coded user. Now this is actually we just last week we just created a main UI and set visible. We didn't validate whether the username and the passwords are there. So we want to create that kind of a layer now before we complete the other things. So let's try to do that. Just complete this class. So I'll give some time to do that. So this one. So any questions you can ask. So watch it the recording again. So we'll have a revision as well. So after that final week, they will be having the database connection. We'll have another session for that. So see that how to do it. Okay, so let's see how to complete the last session of this lab. So we'll see how to create a login session, right? So I'm going to now the purpose of this, the final section is now whatever the things you do, like you can see that output. So when you run this program, now this doesn't validate the username password, right? So when I click the login button, it just goes there. So what I want to do is we want to generate, like if the login username and the passwords are correct, only we will go into the login UI. So we can create a temporary database in array that will be kept on the login. So once the logins are validated, only we should go to the UI. Otherwise, we should say it is actually not valid. So in that case, let's create another scenario for this. So I'm going to create another type of a model class to store this username. So I'm going to keep username and the password and the user type to indicate whether it is actually administrator. Usually, if it is an admin, now this is what we need to do. So if it is an admin, so admin user, they should be able to see all the interfaces like the bicycle UI, rider UI, and service account. So if it is a let's say rider, they should be able to see only the rider UI. If it is like and the bicycle UI. Like if it is like a bank, we should be able to see the savings account UI. Likewise, we can create three type of users according to that scenario. So let's see how to create that kind of a login. So what I want to do is, like, there are three users. Admin, that should be able to see everything. That will, like, when I click on it, they can show the rider UI, bicycle UI, and the savings account UI. But if it is a rider, normal rider, we should be able to only see the rider UI. That means only see the rider UI. If I see the the savings account UI, they will able to see the banking account, the bank savings account UI, which is this one. So let's see how to validate that kind of layering concept. So let's create a user. So I want to create a username password model. So I'm going to create a Java class. You get used to this template, right? Now we have seen so far past week about model classes, about the rider and the new user. I'm going to create a user. So class name is user, and just create finish. Now you can see that the model has been created for the user. So let's see what are the information that we can store for a user. So I'm going to say it is a username and string password, and we can store the last thing is the user type. So this is how you create a user. So you can just generate the getters and setters and the constructors for them. I just select and generate it. So we generate the constructors and the getters and setters and encapsulate it so they can't access it from the outside. So we created the model class, set password and those things. Now we have a user. So we can have the password, username, and the user type. So now what we need to do is, when I click on the button, we should be able to provide that user some details, some login info. So for that, we only create the rider control and the savings account controller. Let's create another controller for the login. Let's say login control. So this is for the user validation. You can see the controllers that we have created for each savings account, rider, login. Likewise, we have created so much of controllers, right? So the login validation also we can just generate a control. Now, like what we have done in the rider, we can just create object from the user and check whether the username is equal and return it true or false. Same logic we can try to write it here. So I'm going to use the same logic. So import. So models dot. I'm going to use the user class. So I'm going to photocopy it, right? Look at it. So I'm going to copy the logic that we have written onto the rider. So you should be able to reuse the code. See, model.rider. I'm going to say model.user, and I'm going to create a rider here earlier. Now this time we are going to create a user. Let's say user obj. So that is to create the user object that we have created here. Now, like what we have done, we can public user, like some kind of user to add the user. Yeah, so we can write a method for adding a user. You can just copy the same logic to add a user. We don't need this rider. I can say add user. So you can use the login buttons logic here, right? The username, password, and the type to create a user. So this one is the user object. So this should be a user, username, password, and the type. So that's it, right? So we just create a user. Now there should be another method to validate whether the user is actually username is correct or not. So I'm going to say public boolean. So we can write a boolean method to whether it is actually the validate or like the user is correct or not, or we can just generate a user type as well. Let's say validate user. So we should be able to create a controller class, a list of arrays. I'm going to validate whether the user is exist in the array list. Just to demonstrate it to you, I'm going to say user. So I just created a user to validate it. Now in this case, let's create a database first. That is easy, right? So I'm going to create another database to create our username passwords in a DB. I'm going to say user DB. So this is an array list. So I can just create an array list. So you can see that what we discuss in a week. So I'm going to create a database of users to validate our details. So now what I'm going to do is, so now this user database should be initialized with our user details. So I'm going to generate a constructor, just empty one. So if you want to add a new user, you will be able to create it. But if I want to generate a new array list, so this is what our array list. I'm going to add some users hard coded. Now we'll see how to do it after the like the final week to how to add into a database. But currently we'll create a simple users like 3 users. Username is, let's say, test1. Password is actually, let's say, password is 123, and the type is, let's say, it's an admin. So this is an admin account. So likewise, we create 3 hard-coded user accounts. 1, 2, 3. Like test2 is actually 456. 456. The last one is 789. So 3 sample user accounts. So this is actually rider. This is the banker. So 3 type of user accounts that we have created. Now, when the user click on the login button, they check this database with the user DB whether this username and the passwords are correct. If it is yes, then we return true. Otherwise, we return null. That is our validate user prompt here. So this is our logical layer. So we need to write our logic here. So I'm going to write an enhanced for loop that we discuss in the lecture. So you can say u. So I can check with this database whether the user exists in our list. So I'm going to check whether if this the current user dot, let's say, get username dot equals this u dot get username, and we need to check whether the password is also matching user dot get password that equals the password is actually so that is actually u dot get password. So then only we just return that user the u to the outside, right? So else I'll return null. So that means the user is not found. It's very simple logic. So we have just created for loop to travel whether the username is actually there and the password is same. We just return it. Otherwise, we return null at the end of the loop. So now we have a database which has 3 user types: username, test1, 2, 3, and the admin, rider, and the banker. So our control is now ready. Now it's a matter of clicking on this login UI button, get the password, and store it and check whether the validation. So before you do validation, you need to check the username and the password. So that's what we need to do. So I'm going to text that, double click on the button. So I just double click on this button, login button, take the username equal to txt. You can say I forgot to give it a name. So let's change the variable name. So let's say txt username. So this is my user we have created. So if I want to create a password, I can say txt password. So now, if I want to get the username, that is a text, I can say txt username dot get text. But the password field is a little bit different. So password field is a char array, right? The password is actually a char array. So you can't store it inside a string variable. So this is a problem that we need to deal. So you get the password, but after you get the password, what you need to do is you store it inside a string by, let's say, password text is equal to this. I'm going to create a new string from it. I can say I'm going to create a new string with some char values. So the password is actually what we're going to store. Now, since I just stored the password text into the new string variable, now we can just validate the username and the password text by creating a user. So first of all, what we discussed in early weeks, you can use the same theory. We have to import that controller class and the modules, like what we discussed in the rider class. So here we did the models and the controllers for our project. Now this time also for the login, I'm going to import it. So I'm going to import the model.username. This is the user I'm going to import. Then I'm going to import controllers dot login controller. So then I'm going to create a login controller. So login controller. Then we can just create empty initialization code. So once you initialize the controller, now we have written a method to add a new user, right? Like the login add user. So we can use that. So we can just check whether the like first of all we need to create a model class. So let's say this is our user. I'm going to store the user details equal to with the controller we have it dot add user. Now you know that this is the username and this is the password, and the user type currently I don't have the user type. Let's put empty. There's no, we don't know whether it is actually admin or not. We just put empty. So then what we need to do is, like, since we have a user, I'm going to check whether the user is actually exist in this database. So that is what we do with the validate method. So now we created the user here. So when you validate it, we just check whether the username passwords are equal and check the get the data type. So now what I'm going to do is, yeah. So now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to check whether the user is validated. I can say user, let's say validated user is equal to, I'm going to use the controller class we have generated, controller dot valid user. So this is the method that we have used here. So that is validated user to generate the new user, like whether the username and the passwords are equal. If it is true, we return the user, otherwise it is not. So now since I have put a semicolon, now this validated user is there. This is our validated user. Now if the user is existing, that means this is not null, otherwise it should be empty. So I'm going to check whether this validated user is not equal to null. So if it is not equal to null, we can just display the relevant UI logins. Else we can show a customized JOption message that from the rider UI we just used here, like error message, like kind of a error message. We can just copy it to the login. We can just click OK. I can say invalid username or password. So otherwise, if it is not null, that means the user is existing, we can just check whether if the user is actually a admin, we open the admin panel. If the user is actually a banker, we open the banker panel. Likewise, we just display it as it is. So I'm going to check whether if the validated user, the get user type is equal to, I'm going to check whether it is an admin. So if it is an admin, we can just display the main UI, the main interface, so which we have coded so far like this. See, if it is an admin, we display the main user interface. Like else, if it is not an admin, we can just write this logic. So if it is actually a rider, we need to display the rider UI. Rider, you can say rider UI. I'm going to create a new rider object. Open. So if the last one is an bank, so we want to say the savings UI. So that's it. Very simple logic. Like now in the program, it says you need to write an exception handling code to UI validation. So we can put another try catch blocks if these are empty. We can provide a please like if it is empty means that is number format exception. So we can just catch the main exception. If we don't know the type, we can show an error message. Like you can say that details empty. Like this. So now when you run this program, the login button will be prompting. When I click on the login, it says invalid username on the password. Let's say test and the password is 123. Did I make a mistake? Yeah, the username is actually one. Yeah, test1. So test1, you go to the login of the admin. So if I try the 456 password, it should go to the rider. So you can see relevant UI is now working accordingly. So let's say test2, password is actually 456, then only let's go to the rider. So now they validate the user logins as well. Now they go to the password fields as well. So now completely working system. So the only thing that is missing from this kind of a project is the database layer, right? So you can see the only thing that we didn't complete at this, we didn't complete the database layer. We need to do it. So we'll have another session after your final exams are finished. Before we evaluating your group project, I'll teach you how to connect to the SQL Server database. So in that session, I will be teaching you the database layer and how to use the service layer. So today we learned how to use login validation. The simple button click and check whether the user is actually validated or not. And all for all the user types we have generated this kind of a model class. Always start with that, right? Like for your group project, if you want to start with a wristwatch, you can create a class like that and the information regarding that. Then only we implement the model, right? So I think that will be the like end of this small lab session. So this one is actually the last one before the database connection. So we'll have a database lab last week after the final exam. But this is a small session that we have completed so far. Right, so I will be putting this completed project where we finished our source code Java, yeah, so that we have done our logics. So I will be creating a zip file and the recording also. I'm going to say this is the login completed. So you can always look it back. So you can try to get it the file. Yeah, so this is what we have done, the completed one. So like we will have a revision session, right? So in the next week, so for the do the past papers for the final exam. So next week those who have exam like midterm, like those who scored less than 13 points, so make sure you do it, right? Because that is helpful for your final marks. Otherwise, if your marks are too low, that is bad for your grades. So do that project. So that login completed one is actually now done. So we'll have another session to connect to the SQL Server database, which is the final section. We can connect to the database layer and the service layer last week. So we'll have that arranged on the Moodle. I'll put the date. So that's the end of it, right? So I'll put the recording of today, right? So we have completed the Java subject syllabus. So you can try to practice some additional questions from the past papers. But if you want to like get more practices, you can just get this book and do some questions from that, because all the component that we have done is the syllabus is entirely there. You can see the class study tips, everything is there for the examination. You can try to do it and do the first exam of Java Oracle certification, this exam, and you can practice for the final as well from this book study guide. Exam number 1 is at 0808. This is exam, right? So at 5 o'clock, if you like notice, there will be a DBMS revision. I think you will be able to see the Zoom links on that DBMS page on the Moodle. So is there any other question that you need to ask before we finish today's session? Any questions that you want to ask in the lecture, this session? How we validated the user name password? You can practice that, do it right by looking at the recording, those who have power cuts. Okay, so then that's it, right? So we'll see on the exam week. So when is our final exam start date? Like usually it start on the 16th, but Java will be usually at the last week, right? Like it's not the first day. Like it will be like Java will be like this week, maybe 21st. This kind of a week. There's a gap between your subjects. So after that, we'll have evaluation on the project. For that, I will be teaching you how to connect to the SQL Server database. So I wish you good luck. So we'll have a revision session on the next week, right? Next Wednesday. So practice the last week, like the 2019 past paper and count on the digital library. Get the 2019 past paper. You can get it that. So that's all. Thank you very much. So make sure to attend the DBMS session at 5 o'clock for the revision. Thank you.